The fluorescent hum of the server room filled the silence at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in March, and Victoria Hayes stood alone on the 47th floor of Meridian Tower, watching Chicago spread beneath her like a circuit board of light and shadow. She had been reading quarterly reports for 14 hours straight, the numbers dancing across her screen in patterns that should have brought satisfaction, but instead stirred something restless in her chest. Revenue up 12%, net profit exceeding projections, stock price holding steady, everything measured, tracked, optimized, everything exactly as it should be. Yet something felt wrong. Victoria possessed the instincts of a predator in the corporate jungle, the ability to sense ripples before they became waves, to detect the faint tremors that preceded earthquakes. Marcus Webb's financial reports arrived each quarter with the precision of clockwork polished to a gleam that reflected nothing but success. No warning signs, no potential risks flagged for review, no shadows lurking in the margins. The perfection itself had become suspicious, though she couldn't articulate why. She rubbed her eyes, acknowledging the exhaustion that her schedule refused to accommodate. Her physician had mentioned rest during her last appointment, speaking in the careful tones reserved for patients who wouldn't listen. Rest meant empty hours. Empty hours meant space for thoughts she'd spent 2 decades learning to suppress. The memory surfaced unbidden, as it always did when her defenses dropped. Eleanor Hayes, sitting in the darkness of their Cleveland apartment, a wine bottle clutched like a lifeline, wedding photographs scattered across the floor like casualties of war. Her mother's voice, hoarse from crying, cutting through the shadows of Victoria's childhood bedroom. "Your father promised me everything, Victoria. He promised forever." The laugh that followed held no humor, only the bitter residue of shattered faith. "His forever lasted exactly 14 years. Victoria shook her head, forcing the image back into its cage. She decided to walk to the break room for coffee, an unusual choice given that assistants typically delivered everything to her desk. The 47th floor stretched silent and dim at this hour, emergency lighting casting long shadows across the marble, the building's ventilation system humming its constant mechanical lullaby. She passed the server room and heard the clang of metal against metal. Through the glass partition, she saw him, a man kneeling beside a cooling unit, adjusting something with practiced precision. The flashlight mounted on his forehead cast his shadow large against the wall, transforming him into something mythic in the industrial darkness. He moved without hurry, each gesture deliberate and certain, the way a surgeon might approach a critical incision. Victoria found herself stopping, watching without being seen. There was something in the way this maintenance worker handled the machinery. He spoke to it. She realized his lips moving in words too soft to carry through the glass, as if the metal and wires constituted a living thing, deserving of conversation. His hands moved with the confidence of absolute familiarity, knowing every circuit, every potential failure point, every secret the system might hide. 5 minutes passed before she became aware of the time. The realization irritated her. This was a maintenance technician, a cog in the vast machinery she commanded, not worthy of attention, not worth remembering. Then he looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. His eyes were brown and warm, despite the fatigue that shadowed them. There was depth there, the kind she rarely encountered in the executives who filled her days with presentations and projections. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement that contained respect, but no subservience, then returned to his work as if a CEO observing him at midnight was merely another ordinary occurrence. Victoria walked away without getting her coffee, returning to her office with a restlessness she couldn't name and didn't want to examine. Morning arrived with the mechanical precision Victoria demanded from every aspect of her existence. She entered Meridian Tower at 7:30 a.m., as she had every workday for 4 years, and found Diane Powell waiting with coffee and the day's schedule already prepared. Diane represented everything Victoria valued in an associate: anticipation, discretion, efficiency. 5 years of working together had created a rhythm between them, a synchronicity that made Diane seem less like an employee and more like an extension of Victoria's own will. "Good morning, Victoria." Diane's smile held its usual warmth, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her navy dress professional without being severe. Marcus requested the Q2 forecast meeting for 9 o'clock. Lunch with the Singapore partners at noon. Richard wants a call at 4 regarding the Nexus acquisition. Victoria accepted the coffee, nodding as she processed the information. "Anything I should know about Diane's hesitation lasted barely a heartbeat, but Victoria noticed. She noticed everything, or at least everything, that appeared on her radar. There's a minor issue with the maintenance department. Karen reported that a night shift employee has been requesting schedule changes repeatedly due to personal circumstances. Marcus recommended termination. Who? Daniel Carter, technician, 2 years with the company. Diane's shrug conveyed elegant dismissal. Not important. The name triggered something in Victoria's memory. The man from last night. The one with steady hands and eyes that held depths. A part of her, the part she'd taught to remain silent, wanted to ask more. The rest of her, the part that had built an empire from the ruins of her mother's broken dreams, understood that such curiosity served no purpose. Marcus can handle personnel decisions. I'll pass that along. Victoria moved into her day, and Daniel Carter faded from conscious thought like morning mist burning away beneath the sun. In his corner office overlooking Lake Michigan, Marcus Webb received Diane's encrypted message and smiled. Victoria's disinterest had been predictable, almost disappointingly so. He had spent 15 years cultivating his position at Meridian Technologies, building networks of influence through favors and secrets, positioning himself as indispensable to operations that increasingly depended on his manipulation of numbers and narratives. The laptop before him displayed an email from Blackstone Equity, the words stark against the screen's glow. Meridian stock needs to drop 40% within 6 months. Plan B if necessary. Marcus glanced at the file on his desk, the one labeled Daniel Carter, Confidential. 3 years of careful work had gone into neutralizing that particular threat. The engineer had been too talented, too innovative, too capable of exposing the intellectual theft that formed the foundation of Marcus's reputation. Tragedy had provided the perfect opportunity. A dead wife, a vulnerable daughter. The leverage practically handed to him on a silver platter. He hated Daniel Carter with an intensity that transcended professional rivalry. Every system the engineer designed, every problem he solved, every innovation that should have propelled Marcus's career forward, but instead came from someone else's mind, reminded Marcus of the fundamental truth he'd spent his entire life trying to escape. He would never be good enough on his own merits. The phone buzzed. Diane again. She's not paying attention to Carter. Proceed as planned. Marcus typed his response and returned to the spreadsheets that would soon bring Meridian to its knees. 3:30 in the afternoon found Daniel Carter waiting outside Lincoln Elementary School in Logan Square, his worn jacket insufficient against Chicago's March wind. His phone buzzed with a text from Karen Sullivan in HR. Marcus denied your schedule change request. Again, I'm sorry. The 8th denial in 3 months. He slipped the phone back into his pocket as the school doors burst open, releasing a flood of children into the gray afternoon. His eyes scanned each face until he found the one that made everything worthwhile. Daddy, Emma ran toward him with her backpack bouncing, her brown curls flying, her smile erasing every indignity he'd suffered since the last time he had held her. She launched herself into his arms with the absolute trust of a child who had never known her father to fail her. The walk home took them through streets Daniel had memorized over 3 years of routine, past the corner store, where Emma liked to buy gummy bears on Fridays, past the park where they fed pigeons on Sunday mornings, past the coffee shop that still displayed a faded photograph of Sarah in its window because she'd been a regular before the accident. I got 98 on my math test. Emma's voice carried the specific pride of a 7-year-old announcing a major accomplishment. Only missed one fraction problem. 98 is incredible, Em. I'm so proud of you. She fell quiet for half a block, and Daniel recognized the shift. Emma possessed an emotional intelligence that sometimes frightened him, an ability to read moods and detect undercurrents that most adults never developed. Her mother had been the same way. Daddy, are you okay? I'm fine. Why do you ask? You have your worried face, the one you get when the company messages you. She looked down at her sneakers. I don't want you to be so. Daniel stopped walking and knelt on the cracked sidewalk, bringing himself to her eye level. I promise you, I'm okay. Work has some challenges right now, but nothing I can't handle. Emma studied him with Sarah's green eyes, and the resemblance tightened something in his chest that never fully loosened. Mommy used to say that too, before she went away. The words cut deeper than any accusation Marcus Webb could level. Daniel pulled his daughter close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the fragile strength of her small body against his. I'm not going anywhere, Em. I promise you, I will always come back." She held him tightly, and for a moment the world narrowed to the two of them standing on a Chicago sidewalk while the afternoon traffic hummed its indifferent symphony around them. The memory of how he'd arrived at this point surfaced as they continued walking, triggered by Emma's words about her mother. 3 years ago, Daniel Carter had been Dr. Daniel Carter, Senior Systems Engineer at Meridian Technologies, MIT graduate rising star. He'd designed the AI logistics platform that had transformed the company from a regional player into a national powerhouse. He'd had an office on the 35th floor, a team of 12 engineers, a future that seemed to stretch toward limitless horizons. Then Sarah died, a rainy November afternoon. A phone call from the office that Marcus Webb had insisted couldn't be rescheduled. Sarah driving to pick up Emma from school because Daniel couldn't leave the meeting. A semi-truck losing control on Interstate 90. The rest existed only as fragments: the hospital waiting room, the doctor's carefully neutral expression, the moment when the world divided into before and after. Daniel couldn't forgive himself. Logic insisted the accident wasn't his fault. Grief recognized no logic. The image of Sarah in the morgue remained forever linked to the memory of sitting in that conference room, listening to Marcus Webb drone about cost optimization, while his wife's car crumpled around her. He'd resigned from his senior position the day after the funeral. But Emma needed health insurance. The medical coverage that monitored her mild asthma and Meridian's benefits package remained essential. Marcus had proposed a solution with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Night maintenance, 1/5 the salary, but the insurance intact. A position befitting Daniel's new circumstances. Daniel had accepted because Emma was all he had left. The weeks that followed blurred together in a fog of grief and adjustment. He learned to make himself invisible, to perform miracles in the shadows, while others took credit in the light. He learned that visibility meant risk, and risk meant losing the one thing that kept him breathing. Emma became his entire universe, and he shaped every decision around her gravity. 1 week after the midnight encounter in the server room, Victoria Hayes sat in a linea with three people who could determine Meridian's future. Richard Pemberton occupied the chair to her left, his silver hair and stern expression projecting the authority expected of a board chairman. Gregory Tan and Michelle Lim from Singapore's Ascendant Capital represented the possibility of a $500 million expansion into Southeast Asian markets. The restaurant embodied the rarefied air Victoria breathed naturally. Candlelight danced across crystal stemware. Wine that cost more than most workers earned in a week flowed with elegant discretion. Chef Grana Chatz's creations arrived as edible art, each course a testament to what money could command. Victoria wore black Armani, her dark hair swept into its customary professional arrangement, her makeup minimal but flawless. She was explaining the AI logistics model that had made Meridian dominant in its sector, the technical innovations that had transformed supply chain management into predictive science when her gaze drifted to a table near the window. And the world tilted on its axis. Daniel Carter sat there. The maintenance worker from the server room, the nobody that Diane had dismissed without a second thought. He wore a three-piece suit of obvious quality dark fabric that fit his broad shoulders with tailored precision. His hair was combed rather than disheveled. His posture conveyed the ease of someone who belonged in rooms like this, who had perhaps been born to them. Across from him sat a woman. Beautiful in an understated way, her black hair cut in a professional bob, her red dress simple but elegant. She leaned close to speak, and their intimacy was obvious. The comfort between them spoke of trust, built over time, of conversations that mattered, of connection that transcended mere attraction. As Victoria watched, the woman reached across the table and took Daniel's hand. Victoria's throat went dry. She recognized what she felt, though she'd spent 2 decades learning to suppress it. Jealousy, hot and uncomfortable, flooding through her system like poison. But beneath the jealousy lurked something more disturbing, awakening. 18 months ago, she'd seen Daniel in the server room and forced herself to forget. 12 months ago, she'd passed him in a hallway and quickened her pace. 6 months ago, she'd heard Diane mention his name and felt a twinge in her chest that she'd immediately buried. She had built walls around herself, and Daniel Carter had somehow found the cracks she didn't know existed. The woman leaned closer, speaking in low tones. Daniel listened with complete attention, nodding like a man whose opinion mattered, whose thoughts carried weight. His expression held none of the neutral blankness Victoria had glimpsed during their midnight encounter. Here he was, someone else entirely. Then he smiled. Victoria felt something break in her chest. That smile was nothing like the brief nod he'd given her through the server room glass. This smile was warm, genuine, unguarded. It transformed his face, revealed depths she'd never imagined, suggested a person she'd never tried to know. Her water glass trembled slightly in her hand. She forced her attention back to Richard and the Singapore investors, but her eyes returned against her will, drawn to the sight of Daniel being treated like someone who mattered. A lull in her own conversation allowed fragments of the woman's voice to carry across the restaurant's ambient noise. Tomorrow, if you sign these papers, Marcus Webb will have nowhere to run. The words made no sense in the context Victoria understood. Marcus was her CFO, her trusted right hand in financial matters. What papers? What did Daniel have that could threaten Marcus? Victoria finished the dinner meeting on autopilot, her mind churning with questions she couldn't answer and implications she couldn't ignore. Gregory Tan and Michelle Lim expressed enthusiasm about the potential partnership. Richard seemed satisfied with her performance. She shook hands and smiled and said the appropriate things while a maintenance worker in an expensive suit occupied an increasingly large portion of her consciousness. That night alone in her penthouse apartment overlooking the Chicago skyline, Victoria stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows and acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was going to investigate Daniel Carter, not because of security concerns, she told herself, not because of jealousy, because information was power and she needed to understand what was happening beneath the surface of her own company. The lie tasted bitter even as she swallowed it. Morning brought Diane into Victoria's office with her usual efficiency, and Victoria set the trap she didn't recognize as a mistake. I need you to investigate someone. Daniel Carter Maintenance Department. Diane's expression flickered with something Victoria might have called satisfaction if she'd been paying closer attention. Is there a problem with him? I overheard some concerning information. He may be meeting with outsiders to discuss company matters. Victoria kept her voice neutral, revealing nothing of the restaurant or her reasons for being there. Find out about the woman he's seeing, Rachel something. Diane nodded, her eyes bright with purpose. I'll handle it immediately. In a private conference room 30 minutes later, Diane made a phone call to Marcus Webb. Victoria's suspicious. She wants Daniel investigated. Marcus's silence stretched for several seconds before his laugh filled the receiver. Perfect. We can use this. How? Victoria's jealous. A cold CEO suddenly interested in a maintenance worker. She has feelings for him. Marcus's voice carried the satisfaction of a predator sensing weakness. We'll show her that Daniel is a threat, not to the company, but to her ego. She'll eliminate him herself. Diane smiled into the phone. I understand. 2 days later, Diane delivered a report designed with surgical precision. Not entirely false, but assembled and interpreted to create a specific impression. The woman is Rachel Morgan, an attorney specializing in corporate fraud. Diane placed photographs on Victoria's desk, Rachel and Daniel walking out of a restaurant, their body language suggesting familiarity. She works for Morrison and Associates, a firm with a history of representing our competitors in litigation. Victoria's frown deepened. She's a lawyer. Yes, and she and Daniel Carter seem quite close. Diane let a meaningful pause stretch between them. I don't want to speculate, but a maintenance technician has access to sensitive systems. If he's providing information to outside parties. Victoria's hand tightened around her pen. She didn't want to believe this, but logic, the cold reasoning she'd always trusted, presented a compelling case. Why would a night shift maintenance worker dine at Alinea with a corporate fraud attorney? Why were they discussing Marcus Webb? Why did Daniel need to ensure someone named Emma was safe before taking action? The conclusions assembled themselves with terrible efficiency. Victoria had spent her entire career learning to identify threats before they materialized. Daniel Carter had just painted a target on himself. Bring him to my office, tomorrow 4 o'clock. The email arrived in Daniel's inbox at 11:00 p.m. while he was checking cooling systems in the basement of Meridian Tower. Meeting requested with CEO, 4:00 p.m. tomorrow, attendance mandatory. He read the message 3 times, his heart rate increasing with each pass. The CEO, Victoria Hayes. He'd never spoken with her directly, had only seen her from a distance at company-wide meetings, a remote figure in expensive suits, making pronouncements about quarterly performance and strategic vision. Why would she want to see him? He called Rachel Morgan from the loading dock, his breath visible in the cold night air. They know. He kept his voice low despite the empty space around him. Victoria Hayes wants to meet with me. Rachel's response came after a pause. That doesn't necessarily mean trouble. She might have discovered something about Marcus and wants to ask you questions. Or Marcus found out we're investigating and is using her to eliminate me. Daniel leaned against the concrete wall, exhaustion weighing on his shoulders. What should I do? Go to the meeting. Don't reveal anything about the investigation. See what she wants. Another pause. Daniel, if Victoria Hayes is on Marcus's side, we lose our only chance. But if she's not, then I've found the most powerful ally possible. He hung up and stared at the photograph of Emma on his phone's home screen. She was laughing at the picture, holding an ice cream cone captured during one of the rare good days when grief loosened its grip and joy seemed possible again. He'd endured everything for her. The humiliation, the stolen credit, the transformation from rising star to invisible cog. He'd built walls of silence to protect her from the consequences of his speaking out. But there were limits. If Victoria Hayes intended to accuse him of betraying the company he'd saved countless times without recognition or thanks, he would not bow his head and accept the blow. The executive conference room on the 47th floor existed to intimidate. Victoria had chosen it deliberately, the mahogany table stretching 20 feet, the leather chairs projecting authority, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing Chicago's skyline like a kingdom awaiting conquest. Thomas Reed sat to her right, his role as COO making him the appropriate witness. Karen Sullivan from HR occupied another chair, her presence required by company protocol. Both understood something was wrong, though neither knew exactly what Victoria intended. Daniel Carter entered at precisely 4 o'clock wearing his gray maintenance uniform. Oil stains marked his collar. His work boots left faint tracks on the polished floor. The contrast between his appearance and the room's opulence screamed with calculated effect. He did not look afraid. Victoria stood at the head of the table, navy suit, impeccable dark hair pulled back with severe precision. When Daniel entered, she felt the sensation again, that inexplicable awareness she'd been trying to suppress since the server room. He carried himself differently than the subordinates who usually sat in those chairs. No cowering, no nervous energy, just patient attention, as if he had all the time in the world and she was merely another appointment. Sit down, Mr. Carter. He sat. His brown eyes met hers without flinching. I'll be direct. I have information suggesting you've been meeting with outside legal representation to discuss internal company matters. Silence. Daniel's expression didn't change. Rachel Morgan, corporate fraud attorney. Do you have an explanation? His voice was calm when he finally spoke, and something in its steadiness irritated her more than defiance would have. What I do outside of working hours is my personal business. Not when it affects this company. Victoria stepped closer, using her height advantage to project dominance. I heard you and Ms. Morgan discussing one of my executives. I have a right to know what you're doing. Something shifted in Daniel's eyes. Not fear, she realized. Disappointment. You heard where? Victoria hesitated. She didn't want to admit she'd been at Alinea, didn't want to reveal how closely she'd been watching him. You were following me. I'm protecting this company. The bitter laugh that escaped him carried no humor. This company? Right. He stood and Thomas watched Karen hold her breath. You want to know what Rachel and I discussed? We talked about how your CFO has stolen 7 of my innovations over the past 3 years, about how he turned my work into his achievements, about how he pushed me from senior engineer to night maintenance after my wife died. Victoria stood frozen, the words refusing to process. You don't know anything about me. You didn't know my name until last week. You've never looked down at people like me, the ones who make sure you have electricity for your computers and climate control for your meetings and systems that actually function. Victoria's voice hardened, the instinct to maintain control overriding the growing unease in her chest. That doesn't explain why you're meeting with outside attorneys instead of reporting internally. Daniel's laugh was brief and joyless. Report internally, I tried that. 2 years ago. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her want to look away. You know what happened, and Marcus Webb called me into his office, showed me photographs of my daughter walking to school, and told me that accidents can happen anytime. That health insurance is very important for a child. The silence that followed seemed to crush the air from the room. Thomas closed his eyes, confirming suspicions he'd never been able to prove. Karen covered her face with her hands. Victoria felt the floor shifting beneath her feet, the carefully constructed narrative of her company crumbling with each word. I stayed quiet because of Emma. I endured everything because of Emma. I became invisible because Emma needs medical coverage and I couldn't risk losing it. Daniel moved toward the door. But don't think for a moment that you can accuse me of betraying a company I've saved dozens of times while nobody even knew my name. Stop. Victoria's command emerged sharp, automatic. I haven't dismissed you. Daniel turned back, and for the first time she saw him clearly. Not as a maintenance worker or a subordinate or a threat. As a man who had lost everything and kept fighting, who had chosen his daughter over his pride, who possessed a dignity that her accusations couldn't diminish. You don't need to dismiss me. His voice carried quiet certainty. I work here because my daughter needs health insurance. That's the only reason. Victoria's wounded pride overrode the growing awareness that she'd made a terrible mistake. The walls she'd built, the defenses that had protected her since childhood, slammed back into place. From now on, you follow the schedule I set. No exceptions, no special accommodations. If you can't commit fully to this company, perhaps you should reconsider your employment. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and Victoria had the uncomfortable sense of being weighed and found wanting. Then slowly he reached into his pocket and withdrew a single sheet of paper. This is my resignation. Effective immediately. He placed it on the conference table between them. You never knew who I was, but now you want to decide how I live. He walked toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. There are things more important than jobs, Ms. Hayes. I only hope you realize that before it's too late. The door closed softly behind him. Victoria stood alone at the head of the mahogany table, staring at the resignation letter, feeling as though she had simultaneously won and lost something she couldn't name. Thomas left without speaking, his expression carefully blank. Karen gathered her papers with trembling hands, avoiding Victoria's eyes. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting the conference room in shades of gold that felt like mockery. Daniel collected Emma from school with his face arranged in its usual expression, determined not to let her see the turmoil churning beneath the surface. She ran to him as she always did, backpack bouncing curls, flying her smile, the only thing in the world that still made sense. But Emma noticed. She always noticed. Something happened. He tried to deflect. I'm fine, Em. Just a long day. She didn't say anything else during the walk home, but her silence spoke volumes. When they reached their small apartment in the building that had seen better decades, she set down her backpack and turned to face him, with an expression far too old for her 7 years. You're not working there anymore. It wasn't a question. Em, is it because of the woman, the one at the company, the one who makes you sad? Emma sat down on their worn couch, her feet not quite reaching the floor. I heard you talking to Rachel on the phone about someone named Victoria. Daniel sat beside her, recognizing that his daughter had inherited her mother's inability to be fooled. There were some problems at work, but it has nothing to do with you. You had to work there because of me, because of my insurance. Emma's lower lip trembled, but she held back the tears. She'd learned not to cry, a lesson no 7-year-old should have mastered. If it wasn't for me, you could have a better job. Daniel felt his heart fracture along fault lines he thought had already broken completely. He pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her, with the desperate tenderness of a man who had already lost too much. Emma, listen to me. He tilted her chin up, meeting those green eyes that had belonged to Sarah. You are the best thing in my life. Everything I do, everything I've done is worth it because of you. I would never, ever regret any choice I made for you. But now you don't have a job. His smile was the first genuine one he'd managed all day. I'll figure it out. I always do. He kissed her forehead. Do you trust me? She nodded against his chest, her small arms tightening around him. I trust you. They stayed that way as the afternoon light faded outside their window, father and daughter holding on to each other while the world outside continued its indifferent rotation. In his Gold Coast penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, Marcus Webb raised his whiskey glass in private celebration. Diane's message had arrived minutes earlier. Daniel Carter resigned. Victoria performed better than expected. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled over Chicago. The view had cost him $3 million, but money meant nothing compared to power. Power to shape narratives. Power to take credit for genius he could never generate himself. Power to destroy anyone who threatened his carefully constructed empire. Daniel Carter had been a thorn for 3 years. The engineer's innovations had made Meridian dominant, but the credit belonged to Marcus's strategic innovation team, a department that existed primarily to launder stolen intellectual property. With Daniel gone, the only witness capable of unraveling the theft had been neutralized. Rachel Morgan might have documents, but documents without interpretation were merely paper. Without Daniel to explain the technical details to demonstrate how each stolen patent bore his fingerprints, her case weakened significantly. And in 2 weeks, Meridian systems would begin experiencing problems. Small glitches at first, the kind that could be dismissed as natural degradation. Then larger failures, each one triggering the next in a cascade designed to look like institutional decay rather than deliberate sabotage. Victoria would be too busy fighting fires to investigate a resigned maintenance worker. The stock price would plummet. Blackstone Equity would swoop in with a rescue offer that was actually a hostile takeover. Marcus would emerge as the savior, the steady hand who could guide Meridian through crisis. 6 months, he murmured to his reflection in the window. 6 months, and it all belongs to me. Victoria remained in her office long after the building emptied for the night, the resignation letter sitting on her desk like an accusation. She read Daniel's words again, the simple statement of departure that revealed nothing of the confrontation that had produced it. "You never knew who I was." The sentence echoed in her mind, refusing to fade. She opened her laptop and navigated to the HR system, searching for Daniel Carter's personnel file. Most of the information was locked, requiring special clearance. The authorization signature on the restriction Marcus Webb. The question formed itself before she could suppress it. Why would Marcus lock a maintenance technician's personnel file? Victoria stared into the darkness of Chicago's skyline, and for the first time in years, she began to doubt not the man she'd just driven away, but the people she'd chosen to trust. The city lights blurred and reformed, offering no answers, only reflections of questions she was finally ready to ask. Somewhere across town in a small apartment in Logan Square, Daniel Carter sat beside his sleeping daughter's bed, watching her breathe, remembering the woman he'd lost and wondering what the future held for the child they'd created together. He had made his choice. He had walked away from the only job that kept them insured, the only security he could offer. Tomorrow would bring consequences he couldn't predict. But tonight Emma was safe. Tonight she slept with the peace of a child who trusted her father completely. And that, Daniel decided, was enough. It would have to be. 5 days after Daniel Carter walked out of Meridian Tower, the first cracks appeared in systems that had run flawlessly for years. Victoria arrived at her office to find her email loading 3 seconds slower than usual. Her calendar synchronization delayed her morning reports arriving behind schedule. Minor irritations that most executives would dismiss without thought. Victoria Hayes did not dismiss anything. Thomas Reed appeared at her door before 9 o'clock, his face carrying the particular shade of concern that preceded bad news. "We have a situation developing." "What kind of situation?" "The Cleveland warehouse management system started throwing synchronization errors last night. Nothing critical yet, just delays in inventory updates. But the pattern is unusual." Thomas glanced over his shoulder as if checking for listeners. "Kevin Choi from IT says he's never seen this type of degradation before." Victoria's coffee turned bitter on her tongue. "Get it on it. They're working around the clock." "But Victoria," Thomas lowered his voice further, "this is exactly the kind of problem Daniel Carter used to catch and fix before anyone noticed. He had a sixth sense for system vulnerabilities." The name landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the careful composure Victoria had maintained since that afternoon in the conference room. She had not allowed herself to think about Daniel. Carter had buried the resignation letter in her desk drawer, like evidence of a crime she wasn't ready to acknowledge. "Keep me informed of any developments." Thomas nodded and withdrew, leaving Victoria alone with the growing suspicion that she had made a terrible mistake. The AT department occupied the 32nd floor, a maze of workstations and server racks overseen by Kevin Choi, a man whose expertise in software security had earned him Victoria's trust over 6 years of flawless performance. But Kevin understood code and networks, not the intricate dance of hardware systems and physical infrastructure that kept Meridian's operations running. I'm chasing ghosts. Kevin's frustration leaked through his professional demeanor when Thomas arrived for an update. The errors appear, cause minor disruptions, then vanish before I can trace their origin. It's like someone is testing our defenses. Testing for what? Kevin shook his head, dark circles under his eyes betraying sleepless nights. I don't know, but if this is an attack, they're playing a long game. They don't want to be detected yet. Thomas filed the information away, adding it to the growing list of concerns he wasn't sure how to address. Something was wrong at Meridian, something beyond the normal fluctuations of corporate life, and the one person who might have identified the threat had been driven away by their own CEO. That night, Victoria remained in her office until the cleaning staff finished their rounds and the building settled into its after-hours quiet. She opened her laptop and navigated to Daniel Carter's personnel file using her CEO credentials to bypass the restrictions Marcus had placed on the records. The information that emerged shattered every assumption she had made. Education, Master of Science in Electrical Engineering, MIT. Graduated summa cum laude. Original position, Senior Systems Engineer, Meridian Technologies, 2018-2020. Innovations, 14 patents filed. 7 major system improvements implemented company-wide. Awards, Employee of the Year, 2019. Position change from Senior Engineer to Maintenance Technician, December 2020. Reason for change. Personal request. Approved by Marcus Webb. Victoria scrolled through the list of innovations credited to Daniel, recognizing each one as a cornerstone of Meridian's current success. The AI logistics platform. The predictive maintenance protocols. The energy optimization systems that had reduced operating costs by 30%. Every breakthrough that had propelled the company to dominance bore his fingerprints. Yet the official records attributed all of it to the Strategic Innovation Team, a department under Marcus Webb's direct control. She found the email Daniel had mentioned the complaint he'd filed with HR 2 years earlier, detailing systematic theft of his intellectual property. The message had been forwarded to Marcus for review. No response was ever recorded. Victoria closed her laptop and stared into the darkness beyond her windows, the city lights blurring as something hard and cold settled in her chest. She had accused an innocent man. She had trusted the wrong people. She had done exactly what her mother had done, believing in facades, while the truth rotted behind them. The parallel cut deeper than any professional failure could. 10 days after Daniel's departure, Meridian systems began to hemorrhage. Victoria received the call at 7:03 a.m., Thomas's voice tight with controlled panic. Cleveland One warehouse is down. Complete system failure. We've lost 3 days of inventory data. How is that possible? We're still trying to determine cause. Kevin thinks someone planted a backdoor in our infrastructure, something that was triggered remotely. By 9 o'clock, the Denver facility reported identical symptoms. By 11, the central logistics hub began displaying corrupted data shipping orders to wrong addresses, showing inventory counts that defied physical reality. Customer complaints flooded the service lines. By 2 in the afternoon, Richard Pemberton called with ice in his voice. Meridian stock dropped 8% in 4 hours. Investors are demanding explanations. The board is convening an emergency session at 6 o'clock. A pause that felt like the silence before a verdict. If you can't provide answers, Victoria, will need to discuss leadership alternatives. She ended the call with trembling hands, the magnitude of the crisis finally registering. Everything she had built, every sacrifice she had made, every wall she had constructed to protect herself from vulnerability was crumbling around her. Marcus Webb appeared at her office door, his expression perfectly calibrated to project concern. I heard about this situation. Is there anything I can assist with? Victoria studied him, seeing clearly for the first time what she had missed for years. The smile that never touched his eyes, the helpfulness that always preceded requests, the answers that came too smoothly, too quickly, too conveniently. Marcus, what do you know about Daniel Carter? His composure held, but Victoria caught the microscopic tension in his jaw. The maintenance worker who resigned? Not much. Why do you ask? You locked his personnel file. Why? Standard security protocol. Security. Employees with sensitive personal circumstances require additional privacy protections. Marcus tilted his head with practiced innocence. You shouldn't concern yourself with that right now. We have larger problems to address. The system improvements credited to your department over the past 3 years, who actually designed them. Silence stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Victoria, Marcus's voice lost its warmth, the mask slipping to reveal something harder underneath. You should be careful with questions like that. You're standing on thin ice. Is that a threat? It's advice. His smile returned, but the predator beneath it showed through. The board is losing patience. If you can't resolve this crisis, they'll find someone who can. And I have many friends among them. He turned and walked away, leaving Victoria with certainty she could no longer deny. She needed Daniel Carter. Not because she deserved his help, not because she had any right to ask, but because he was the only person who understood Meridian's systems deeply enough to find and neutralize whatever Marcus had planted. The drive to Logan Square took 40 minutes through evening traffic, Victoria's rental car, anonymous among thousands of others. She had left her security detail behind, unwilling to explain why the CEO of a $2 billion company was visiting a former maintenance worker in a working-class neighborhood. The building looked exactly as she had imagined, from Daniel's file-worn but dignified, its brick facade carrying decades of Chicago weather, its hallways smelling of old cooking, and lives lived close together. She climbed stairs that creaked under her heels, each step increasing the weight of what she was about to attempt. Apartment 3B, she knocked and waited, her heart hammering against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. Daniel opened the door and his expression closed immediately when he recognized her. Not anger, she realized. Exhaustion. The look of someone who had been hurt too many times to risk hoping. Ms. Hayes. His voice held neither welcome nor hostility, only flat acknowledgement. I need to speak with you. About what I don't work for you anymore. About Marcus Webb, about what you know, and about how completely I failed you. Daniel studied her for a long moment, weighing her words against everything she had done. Then instead of closing the door, as she feared, he stepped aside. Come in, but keep your voice down. Emma's doing homework. The apartment was small but immaculate, every surface organized with military precision. Books lined makeshift shelves, technical manuals interspersed with children's stories. Drawings covered the refrigerator door, crayon portraits of faces and emotions rendered with surprising sophistication for a 7-year-old artist. Rachel Morgan sat at the kitchen table, legal documents spread before her, her dark eyes measuring Victoria with the sharp assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating threats. Ms. Hayes, Rachel's tone conveyed neither warmth nor hostility. This is unexpected. Victoria understood immediately how thoroughly she had misread the situation. Rachel wasn't Daniel's lover. She was his ally in a war Victoria hadn't known existed. I know about Daniel's file. I know about the stolen innovations. And I know about the backdoor in our systems. Victoria chose her words carefully, aware that every sentence either built bridges or burned them. I was wrong to accuse him. I trusted the wrong people and doubted the wrong ones. Daniel remained standing near the door, arms crossed, face unreadable. Why are you here? Because the systems are failing. Because Marcus is destroying Meridian from inside. Because you're the only person who understands our infrastructure well enough to stop him. Why should I care what happens to your company? Victoria had no good answer. She couldn't appeal to loyalty or compensation or any of the currencies that usually motivated cooperation. Daniel had demonstrated his immunity to such inducements. You shouldn't care. I don't deserve your help. The words scraped against her pride like broken glass, but she forced them out. I can only tell you that I was wrong. I looked at you and saw only what others showed me. I never looked with my own eyes. Silence filled the small apartment, broken only by the distant sound of a television from a neighboring unit. Daddy, they all turned toward the hallway where Emma stood in pajamas decorated with cartoon cats, her green eyes wide with curiosity and caution. It's okay, Em. Go back to your homework. But Emma had already spotted Victoria and her gaze sharpened with recognition. You're the woman from the company, the one who made Daddy sad. The accusation landed with the precision of a child's unfiltered honesty. Victoria felt its weight settle on her shoulders like physical burden. Yes, I'm the one who made your father sad, and I came to apologize. Emma considered this, her expression shifting through emotions too complex for her years. Do you mean it, or do you just want something from Daddy? Victoria met the child's eyes, recognizing the same impossible clarity she'd seen in Daniel during their confrontation. This girl could see through pretense the way Victoria could see through financial statements. Both, I need help. But I also truly regret what I did. I treated your father unfairly. Emma walked closer, studying Victoria's face with the intensity of someone reading a difficult text. You look sad, like Daddy looks when he misses Mommy. The observation stripped away every defense Victoria possessed. She found herself kneeling to Emma's eye level, meeting the child's gaze, without the armor she wore in boardrooms and negotiations. I am sad. I've been sad for a very long time. I just forgot how to show it. Emma nodded slowly, as if this answer satisfied some internal criteria. Then she looked at Daniel. Daddy, she seems like she means it. Maybe you should listen. Daniel's expression softened almost imperceptibly as he regarded his daughter. Go finish your homework, Em. We'll talk about this later. Emma retreated to her room, but not before casting one more evaluating glance at Victoria, a warning wrapped in a child's innocent features. Rachel broke the silence that followed. Daniel, she could be the ally we need, or another trap, Marcus said. I know. Daniel finally moved from his position by the door, lowering himself into a chair across from Victoria. Tell me exactly what you know. Everything. Victoria laid out the evidence she had gathered, the locked personnel file, the attribution changes on technical documents, the suspicious timing of the system failures, the email Daniel had sent to HR that disappeared into Marcus's control. She described overhearing the conversation at Alinea, her subsequent investigation through Diane, the confrontation in the conference room. I should have questioned the information I was given. I should have looked at the original records instead of accepting interpretations from people who had reasons to lie. Victoria's voice carried the particular shame of someone accustomed to being right. I built my entire career on reading situations accurately, and I missed everything that mattered. Rachel pulled a file from her briefcase, spreading documents across the table. This is what we've compiled. Financial records showing systematic embezzlement through false consulting contracts, patent applications with altered timestamps, email chains between Marcus and Blackstone Equity detailing a plan to crash Meridian stock and execute a hostile takeover. Victoria scanned the papers, her business training, recognizing the patterns immediately. He's been planning this for years. At least 3 years. Rachel's voice hardened. He's been stealing Daniel's innovations, building his reputation on someone else's genius, and positioning himself to either take over the company or sell it to the highest bidder. The back door in our systems. Part of the plan. Daniel spoke for the first time since Victoria began her confession. Create a crisis, crash the stock price. Let Blackstone swoop in with a rescue offer. Marcus emerges as the savior while the real architects of Meridian's success get erased. Victoria understood the elegance of the scheme even as its cruelty revolted her. Why didn't you go to the authorities from the start? I tried internal reporting first. You know what happened. Daniel's jaw tightened with remembered humiliation. After Marcus threatened Emma, I couldn't risk external channels. One anonymous tip to the wrong person and my daughter becomes leverage. You should have what? Daniel's eyes flashed with rare anger. Gone to the police and hoped they could protect a 7-year-old around the clock. Filed a lawsuit and watched it drag through courts for years while Marcus destroyed everything. Risked my daughter's safety on the chance that someone somewhere might listen. Victoria had no response. She had never faced a choice between justice and a child's welfare, had never been forced to weigh principle against protection. Emma is all I have. Daniel's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I would burn every bridge, swallow every insult, disappear entirely if it meant keeping her safe. I understand. Victoria surprised herself by meaning it. And I promise you I won't let Emma be harmed. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her. Pretty words. Daniel's skepticism remained intact. What exactly are you offering? Victoria pulled out her phone and made a call that committed her irrevocably. Thomas, this is Victoria. Effective immediately, Daniel Carter is to be granted full system access with highest clearance level. He reports directly to me, bypassing all other channels. And arrange private security for the address I'm about to give you. 24-hour coverage until further notice. She provided Daniel's address and ended the call. I just created evidence that could end my career if this goes wrong. I've given your lawyer ammunition to use against me. I've made myself vulnerable in ways I've never allowed before. Victoria met Daniel's eyes without flinching. Is that enough for you to trust me? Daniel exchanged a glance with Rachel, some silent communication passing between them. I have conditions. His voice carried no room for negotiation. Rachel participates fully in everything we do. Thomas Reed and Karen Sullivan serve as witnesses to all discussions. And if we succeed, I don't want titles or money. I want my name on the work I created. I want credit restored for everything Marcus stole. Agreed. One more thing. Daniel's gaze moved toward Emma's closed door. No matter what happens, she stays out of this. If there's any danger to her, I walk away immediately. Agreed. Victoria stood, extending her hand. We have a deal. Daniel shook it, and Victoria felt the calluses on his palm, the physical evidence of years spent working with machines and systems, while executives above him took credit for his genius. We start tonight. Daniel released her hand. I need to see what Marcus planted in your systems before he realizes we're working together. The secret workspace occupied a forgotten corner of Meridian's basement level 3, a space Marcus had no reason to visit and no authority to monitor. Victoria had arranged for the room to be equipped with the hardware Daniel needed, and Kevin Choi had been sworn to absolute secrecy. Daniel worked through code like a surgeon examining a patient, his fingers moving across keyboards, with the fluency of someone speaking their native language. Victoria watched from across the room, learning to see him as the person he actually was rather than the nobody she had dismissed. Found it. Daniel's voice carried grim satisfaction after 18 hours of continuous work. The back door was installed through a series of proxies, but the original access point leads back to an admin account in the finance department. Marcus's credentials, routed through layers of misdirection, but yes, his fingerprints are all over this. Daniel pulled up another screen. There's more. A secondary trap, a logic bomb designed to wipe everything if someone tries to remove the back door without knowing it exists. Victoria felt ice form in her stomach. So we can't just fix the system, not without triggering a catastrophe. But I can neutralize both if I have time. Marcus built this to be subtle, not fast. He expected months of gradual deterioration, not immediate discovery. How long do you need? 48 hours. Maybe less if nothing goes wrong. Victoria nodded, already calculating how to stall the board while Daniel worked. I'll buy you the time. Over the next 3 days, Victoria learned things about Meridian Technologies that no quarterly report had ever revealed. She learned that Daniel had saved the company at least a dozen times without anyone recording his name, that he had rebuilt systems at 3 a.m. while executives slept in comfortable beds, that his innovations had generated hundreds of millions in value while he earned a maintenance worker's salary. She learned that he made terrible coffee, but remembered how she took hers after seeing it once. She learned that Emma called him 3 times a day from school, and that each call softened something in his face that stayed hard everywhere else. She learned that grief had not destroyed him, but transformed him, that he had chosen love over ambition and didn't regret the choice. On the second night of their collaboration, Victoria arrived at Daniel's apartment with files that couldn't wait until morning. Emma opened the door, her expression shifting from suspicion to something approaching acceptance. Daddy's in the shower. You can wait if you want. Victoria entered the small living room, feeling like a giant in a space built for more humble lives. Emma settled on the couch with a sketch pad, glancing up occasionally to study their unexpected guest. Can I see your drawings? Emma considered the request with visible deliberation before nodding and making room on the couch. Victoria sat, maintaining careful distance, and accepted the offered sketch pad. The pages revealed a world filtered through a child's emotional intelligence. Faces dominated every sheet, rendered in crayon with surprising sophistication. Joy, grief, anger, fear. Emma captured internal states that most adults struggled to articulate. This is beautiful work. Victoria meant it. You see things other people miss. Mama used to say that. Emma's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone protecting old wounds. She said I had her eyes but Daddy's brain. Victoria turned pages until she found a portrait that stopped her breath. A woman with empty eyes and a frozen face, angular and severe. Is this me? Emma nodded. From when you first came. You looked like a mask someone forgot to take off. The assessment cut precisely because it was accurate. Victoria had worn that mask so long, she'd forgotten it wasn't her real face. You're right, I was hiding. Victoria turned to the next page and found another portrait of herself, this one different. Warmer eyes, a slight smile. And this one, that's you now, when you think nobody's watching. Emma retrieved her sketch pad, hugging it protectively. You're prettier when you're not pretending. Daniel emerged from the hallway, hair damp, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that made him look younger than the man in maintenance coveralls. He stopped when he saw Victoria and Emma sitting together, something complicated passing across his features. It's bedtime. But I was showing Victoria my pictures. Victoria can see more another time. Go brush your teeth. Emma obeyed with the reluctance of a child who sensed important things happening beyond her reach. She paused at the hallway entrance. Victoria, yes. If you're going to be around Daddy Day, you have to promise not to make him sad again. He's already sad enough. Victoria felt the weight of the demand, the responsibility it placed on her. I promise. Emma nodded once satisfied and disappeared into the apartment's depths. Daniel took a seat across from Victoria, the domestic setting, creating an intimacy that their professional encounters had never allowed. She's decided to trust you. Emma doesn't do that easily. She's remarkable. Victoria opened the folder she'd brought. I also came with news. Kevin traced the secondary backdoor's activation trigger. It's tied to a specific date 2 weeks from now. That's when Marcus planned to execute the final phase. The board meeting. Daniel's expression darkened. He was going to crash everything right before the quarterly review. Maximum chaos, minimum time for recovery. We need to move faster than we planned. I can have the systems secured by tomorrow night, but taking down Marcus requires more than technical evidence. We need to expose him in a way that leaves no room for doubt. Victoria had been thinking about exactly that problem. The board meets in 5 days. If we can present everything there, the financial fraud, the intellectual theft, the sabotage in front of Richard and the other directors, Marcus won't have time to spin a counter-narrative. And if your board doesn't believe you, then I lose everything. Victoria met his eyes. But I'd rather lose fighting for truth than win through ignorance. Daniel studied her with the same assessing gaze Emma had inherited. You've changed. I'm trying to. What made you question Marcus after all these years? Victoria considered deflecting, protecting herself with professional distance. But Daniel had seen through her masks, and Emma had drawn portraits that revealed more than mirrors ever showed. My mother. The words came slowly, dragged from depths she rarely acknowledged. She was brilliant, successful, everything I wanted to be. Then my father left her for someone younger, someone who made him feel important. She fell apart, lost her job, started drinking, died when I was 19. Daniel listened without interrupting his silence, creating space for truths she'd never spoken aloud. I watched her destroy herself over a man who promised forever and delivered nothing. I swore I would never be that vulnerable. Never let anyone have that kind of power over me. Victoria's laugh held no humor. So I built walls, treated emotions like enemies, judged everyone by what they could offer rather than who they were. And then I saw you with Rachel at Alinea, saw you smile in a way I'd never seen at the office, saw someone treating you like you mattered. Victoria forced herself to continue despite the shame clawing at her throat. I was jealous, not professionally, personally, and that terrified me. Daniel's expression shifted, something softening behind his carefully maintained defenses. You were jealous of Rachel. I didn't even know your name, had never spoken a word to you, but somewhere along the way, you got under my walls. Victoria shook her head. So I did what I always do when I feel threatened. I attacked. I found reasons to make you the enemy, because that was easier than admitting I'd noticed you. You noticed me. 18 months ago in the server room, you were fixing something at midnight and you talked to the machines like they were alive. Victoria smiled despite herself. I stood there for 5 minutes watching you work. Then I made myself forget because noticing you felt dangerous. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried something new, something that might have been recognition. I saw you that night through the glass. You looked like you were carrying the weight of worlds on your shoulders and you were still standing. I wondered what it cost you to be that strong. Their eyes met, and Victoria felt something shift between them, a tectonic plate moving beneath the surface of carefully constructed distance. I'm not strong. Victoria's admission surprised her. I'm just very good at pretending. Pretending is its own kind of strength. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Victoria, I need you to understand something. I didn't come back to help because of you. I came because Emma deserves to live in a world where people face consequences for their actions. If I walk away, I teach her that bullies win and justice doesn't exist. I understand. But, Daniel paused, choosing his next words carefully. I'm glad it's you I'm working with instead of someone else. You are trying to change. That matters. Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed with a message that drained the color from her face. What is it, Diane? Victoria read the text twice, disbelief warring with dawning horror. She wants to meet tomorrow morning. Says she has concerns about Marcus's behavior she needs to share. Daniel's expression hardened. It's a trap. Diane is compromised. You don't know that. I know that Marcus has had someone inside your circle feeding him information. Who else would it be? Victoria wanted to argue to defend the woman who had been her closest professional ally for 5 years. But the evidence assembled itself with terrible clarity. Diane's careful influence over Victoria's perception of Daniel, her eagerness to investigate rather than verify her constant presence during sensitive discussions. We need to find out for certain. Daniel nodded. I can trace her communications through the system. If she's been reporting to Marcus, there will be evidence. They worked through the night, Rachel joining them via video call to coordinate legal preparations. By dawn, the truth emerged in black and white across Daniel's screen. Encrypted messages between Diane Powell and Marcus Webb. 3 years of correspondence detailing Victoria's movements, her suspicions, her vulnerabilities. A relationship that predated Diane's promotion to communications director. She's been his creature all along. Victoria's voice sounded hollow in her own ears. Everything she told me about you, about the investigation, about company security, all of it designed to serve Marcus's agenda. The latest message sent just hours earlier twisted the knife deeper. V working with DC. They're on to the back door. Accelerate phase 2. Marcus's response followed, understood. If necessary, we use other leverage. The child. Victoria felt rage ignite in her chest, hot and righteous and utterly unfamiliar. He's threatening Emma. Daniel's face had gone pale, his hands frozen over the keyboard. We end this. Now. The board meeting is in 5 days. I don't care about board meetings. Daniel stood, his body tight with barely controlled fury. He's talking about my daughter. I will not wait 5 days for bureaucratic justice while he has time to act. Victoria rose to meet him, placing herself directly in his path. Daniel, listen to me. If we move now without preparation, we give Marcus time to destroy evidence and escape consequences. But if we wait, if we build an airtight case and present it with every director watching, he has nowhere to run. And if he hurts Emma in those 5 days, he won't. Victoria's voice carried steel she hadn't known she possessed. I'm tripling the security on your apartment. I'm moving Emma to a safe location with Rachel, and I'm putting surveillance on Marcus that will document every move he makes. You can do that. I'm the CEO of a $2 billion company. I can do whatever I need to protect the people who matter. Victoria realized as she spoke that she meant it, that somewhere in the past week, Daniel and Emma had joined the impossibly short list of people she would fight for. Daniel searched her face for deception and found only resolve. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen. I give you my word. Your word meant nothing a week ago. A week ago I was blind, now I see. Victoria held his gaze without wavering. Trust me, Daniel, not because I deserve it, but because I'm the best weapon you have against Marcus Webb. The calculation played out behind Daniel's eyes, survival instincts warring with desperate hope. Finally, he nodded. 5 days. But Emma moves tonight, and I want to know where she is every hour. Done. They spent the remaining hours before dawn organizing their assault. Rachel would prepare the legal documentation, ensuring every piece of evidence met courtroom standards. Thomas and Karen would serve as internal witnesses, their testimonies corroborating the pattern of abuse and theft. Margaret Chen, the board member, who had secretly initiated the investigation, would ensure the meeting proceeded despite any objections Marcus raised. By the time morning light crept through Daniel's windows, they had a plan. Victoria returned to Meridian Tower wearing the mask she'd perfected over 2 decades, greeting Diane with the warmth of trusted friendship while bile rose in her throat. The performance required every skill she possessed, every lesson in emotional suppression she'd learned watching her mother fall apart. You wanted to discuss concerns about Marcus. Diane's smile held secrets Victoria could now identify. I've been noticing irregularities in some of his financial reports. I thought you should know. The lies flowed smoothly, designed to gauge how much Victoria had discovered to position Diane as an ally, rather than the enemy she had always been. Victoria listened and nodded and played her part, feeding false information that would reach Marcus within hours. I appreciate you bringing this to me. Let's keep this between us for now while I investigate. Of course, Diane's relief was barely perceptible. I knew I could count on you. After Diane left, Victoria allowed herself one moment of grief for the friendship she had believed real. Then she buried it alongside every other disappointment and focused on the battle ahead. 4 days remained until the board meeting. 4 days to secure systems, gather evidence, protect an innocent child, and bring down a man who had spent 15 years building his empire of lies. Victoria Hayes had built walls around herself for 2 decades, convinced that vulnerability meant destruction. Now she was dismantling those walls brick by brick, and the person she was discovering underneath terrified her more than Marcus Webb ever could. She was learning to feel again, learning to trust, learning that strength didn't mean standing alone. And somewhere in the chaos of conspiracy and consequence, she was learning that the maintenance worker with steady hands and warm brown eyes had become the most important person in her carefully constructed world. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it felt like the first true thing she'd known in years. The boardroom on the 47th floor filled with tension as directors took their seats around the oval table. Richard Pemberton sat at the head, his silver hair catching the morning light, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would determine Meridian's future. Victoria occupied her customary position to his right, her navy suit armor against the battle ahead. Marcus Webb settled to Richard's left, his composure impeccable, his three-piece suit projecting the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. Margaret Chen sat beside Victoria, her presence a silent promise of support. The 4 remaining directors arranged themselves along the table's length, each one representing constituencies and interests that would shape the coming vote. Diane Powell positioned herself behind Marcus, her notepad ready her role as observer, masking her true function as spy. Thomas Reed waited outside the boardroom doors with Karen Sullivan. Their testimonies prepared their nerves raw with anticipation. Beyond them in a secure anteroom, Daniel Carter and Rachel Morgan reviewed their evidence at one final time. Richard opened the meeting with characteristic directness. We've convened to address the operational crisis of the past 2 weeks. Stock price down 18%, customer confidence shaken, investor relations in damage control mode. His gaze swept the room, lingering on Victoria. I expect explanations and solutions. Marcus seized the initiative before Victoria could speak. Richard, as I've documented in my preliminary report, the system failures originated from vulnerabilities in our legacy infrastructure. Unfortunately, the technician responsible for maintenance resigned immediately before the problems manifested. The timing suggests possible sabotage. Victoria felt the familiar trap closing around her, the narrative Marcus had crafted to redirect blame. She let him continue watching the directors absorb his carefully constructed lies. Daniel Carter was a disgruntled employee with access to sensitive systems. He had been requesting schedule accommodations that demonstrated divided loyalties. His departure coincided precisely with the beginning of our troubles. Marcus spread his hands in a gesture of reasonable concern. I'm not making accusations, but the pattern demands investigation. Richard nodded slowly. Victoria, your response? Victoria stood her movement, drawing every eye in the room. I appreciate Marcus's analysis, but I have different information to share. She pressed a button on the remote control, and the wall screen illuminated with data Daniel had extracted from Meridian servers. This is a log of system access records from the past 3 months. The red entries indicate unauthorized modifications to our core infrastructure. The display showed timestamps, IP addresses, and account credentials. The pattern was unmistakable to anyone with technical literacy. These modifications were not made by Daniel Carter. They were made through administrative credentials belonging to our chief financial officer. Victoria turned to face Marcus directly. They were made by you. Marcus's composure flickered for the first time. That's absurd. Someone must have compromised my account. The modifications were routed through 17 different proxy servers designed to obscure their origin. Our IT team spent 72 hours tracing them back to their source. Victoria advanced the display to show email correspondence. These are communications between Marcus Webb and Blackstone Equity, a private investment firm with known connections to our competitors. They detail a plan to crash Meridian's stock price through manufactured crises, enabling a hostile acquisition at artificially depressed values. The boardroom erupted. Directors spoke over each other, questions and accusations tangling in the air. Richard held up his hand for silence, his face carved from granite. These are serious allegations. Do you have corroboration? I do. Victoria gestured toward the door. With your permission, I'd like to bring in witnesses who can explain the technical and legal dimensions of what Marcus has done. Richard nodded and Victoria signaled Thomas to open the doors. Daniel entered first, his presence commanding despite the simple suit he wore. Behind him, Rachel Morgan carried her briefcase of documentation. They took positions at the presentation screen, professionals preparing to deliver testimony that would reshape everything. This is Daniel Carter. Victoria made the introduction with deliberate emphasis. Many of you may not recognize his name, but you know his work. Daniel designed the AI logistics platform that made Meridian dominant in our sector. He developed the predictive maintenance systems that reduced our operating costs by 30%. He created the energy optimization protocols that earned us industry recognition. She advanced the display to show patent records and technical documentation. Over the past 3 years, all of these innovations were credited to Marcus Webb's strategic innovation team. The original authorship was erased. The timestamps were altered. Daniel's contributions were systematically stolen and attributed to others. Marcus stood, his voice sharp with outrage. This is character assassination. You are taking the word of a maintenance worker over a CFO with 15 years of service. I was a senior systems engineer before you destroyed my career. Daniel's voice cut through Marcus's protest like a blade through fog. I have timestamps for every line of code I wrote. I have emails documenting my original submissions. I have recordings of the meeting where you threatened my daughter to ensure my silence. The room went still. Rachel stepped forward, opening her briefcase on the conference table. I represent Daniel Carter in matters related to intellectual property theft and workplace intimidation. I've also been retained by a member of this board to investigate financial irregularities. She nodded toward Margaret Chen, whose expression remained carefully neutral. The evidence we've compiled documents a pattern of fraud, embezzlement, and market manipulation spanning at least 3 years. She distributed folders to each director, the pages dense with financial records, email chains, and technical analyses. Marcus Webb has been siphoning company funds through false consulting contracts. He's been manipulating quarterly reports to hide declining performance in departments under his direct control. And he's been working with outside parties to orchestrate Meridian's destruction for personal profit. Richard examined the documents with the intensity of a man whose legacy hung in the balance. The other directors did the same, their expressions shifting from skepticism to concern to dawning horror. Marcus attempted to regain control. This is a coordinated attack. Victoria is trying to deflect from her own failures by scapegoating me. These documents could easily be fabricated. The FBI doesn't think they're fabricated. Rachel's interruption carried the weight of federal authority. I've been in communication with investigators who are very interested in the financial crimes detailed in those folders. A formal investigation begins within 48 hours. The color drained from Marcus's face. His carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. Each revelation, another brick removed from the foundation of lies he'd built. Victoria pressed the advantage. There's one more piece of evidence the board needs to see. She advanced the display to show the encrypted messages between Marcus and Diane. These communications were recovered from company servers. They document years of corporate espionage, with Diane Powell feeding sensitive information to Marcus in exchange for considerations we're still investigating. Diane's professional mask shattered. Marcus, tell them this isn't true. Tell them, be quiet. Marcus's snarl contained the venom of a cornered animal. The final message appeared on screen, the one that had chilled Victoria's blood when she first read it. If necessary, we use other leverage. The child. Marcus Webb threatened a 7-year-old girl to keep her father silent. Victoria's voice carried the cold fury she'd been suppressing for days. He used a child as a weapon to protect his crimes. That is who you've trusted with Meridian's finances for 15 years. Richard stood, his presence commanding the room's attention. I've heard enough. Marcus Webb, you are immediately suspended from all duties pending criminal investigation. Security will escort you from the building. Diane Powell, the same applies to you. Marcus didn't move, his eyes locked on Victoria with hatred so pure it seemed to warp the air between them. You think this is over. You have no idea what I can do. You have no idea what I've already done. That sounds like a confession. Rachel had her phone out recording. I'm sure the FBI will be interested. Security personnel entered the boardroom, summoned by Thomas during the testimony. They flanked Marcus and Diane, waiting for resistance that would justify force. Marcus rose slowly, his movements deliberate, his gaze never leaving Victoria. This isn't finished. You've made an enemy you can't imagine. When I'm done, you'll wish you'd never heard my name. I already wish that. Victoria met his stare without flinching. But I stopped being afraid of men like you the moment I started telling the truth. They led Marcus and Diane away, their footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The boardroom felt larger, without their presence cleaner somehow, as if toxins had been purged from the air. Richard addressed the remaining directors. I move for a vote of confidence in Victoria Hayes as CEO, with full authority to restructure leadership as she sees fit. Margaret Chen seconded immediately. The vote passed 6-0. Victoria should have felt triumph. Instead, she felt only exhaustion in the nagging certainty that Marcus's final words had been more than empty threats. The call came 6 hours later. Victoria was in her office with Daniel and Rachel planning the transition that would reshape Meridian's executive structure when her phone displayed an unknown number. She answered out of instinct, and Marcus's voice slithered through the speaker. Your security detail is good, but not good enough. Ice crystallized in Victoria's veins. What are you talking about? The safe house where you're hiding the girl. Rachel's apartment on Dearborn Street. 3rd floor unit 3C. Marcus's laugh contained no sanity. Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies? Victoria's eyes met Daniel's across the desk. The blood had drained from his face, his body frozen in the particular stillness of a parent confronting their worst nightmare. If you touch her, I won't touch her if Daniel comes to me. Alone. No police, no security, no heroic rescue attempts. Marcus provided an address in the industrial wasteland of South Side. 1 hour. After that, unfortunate things happened to unfortunate children. The line went dead. Daniel was already moving toward the door. Victoria intercepted him, placing herself between him and destruction. Daniel, stop. This is exactly what he wants. I don't care what he wants. Emma is in danger. And you walking into his trap won't save her. Victoria gripped his shoulders, forcing him to focus on her face. He'll kill you and use Emma as leverage for whatever he does next. You're worth more to him dead than alive. Then what am I supposed to do? Wait here while he hurts my daughter. No, we go together. Victoria was already forming a plan, pieces falling into place with the speed of desperation. Thomas has a security team. I have contacts with the Chicago Police Department. We can coordinate. You heard what he said. No police, no security. He also said no heroic rescue attempts. He's not expecting us to follow his rules. Victoria released Daniel's shoulders and pulled out her phone. I'm going to buy us time. You're going to trust me. The hour that followed compressed into a blur of preparations and prayers. Victoria contacted Thomas, who mobilized Meridian's private security force with combat veterans who had faced worse than a desperate financier. She reached out to a police captain who owed her favors from charity events and corporate donations. She arranged for Rachel to evacuate to a secondary location with backup protection, just in case Marcus's information about the safe house was more than a bluff. Daniel paced like a caged lion, every minute stretching into eternity. His phone showed the tracking app connected to Emma's watch. The signal had gone silent 30 minutes ago. He has her. Daniel's voice cracked on the words. The watch stopped transmitting from Rachel's location. Victoria refused to let fear paralyze her. Then we know where she was taken from. That's information. That's something to work with. They drove to South Side in Victoria's rental car, anonymous and untraceable, while Thomas's team approached from different vectors. The address Marcus had provided led to an abandoned warehouse in a district that had died decades ago, its factories and workshops surrendered to rust and the rats that inherited dead industry. Victoria parked 2 blocks away, the engine silent, the night pressing against the windows like a living thing. I should go alone. Daniel's hand rested on the door handle. He wants me. If I give myself up, maybe he'll let Emma go. He won't. Men like Marcus don't let witnesses survive. Victoria reached across and placed her hand over his. We go in together or we don't go at all. Why, this isn't your fight. Emma isn't your daughter. Victoria thought about all the walls she'd built, all the years she'd spent protecting herself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. She thought about her mother destroyed by trusting the wrong person. She thought about the person she'd been 3 weeks ago, incapable of caring about anyone beyond their utility. I made a promise to a 7-year-old girl. Victoria's voice carried conviction forged in transformation. I told her I would protect her father, and somewhere along the way I stopped being the woman who breaks promises. Daniel studied her face in the dim glow of distant streetlights. Whatever he found there seemed to settle something inside him. Together, then. They moved through the industrial graveyard, their footsteps muffled by decades of accumulated debris. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows like empty eye sockets, its loading doors gaping open like a wound. Inside, a single work light illuminated the center of the cavernous space. Emma sat on a folding chair, her small form dwarfed by the machinery around her, her hands bound with rope that looked loose enough to be symbolic rather than practical. She wasn't crying, Victoria noticed, with something approaching awe. The child's face showed fear, but also the determined composure of someone who believed rescue would come. Marcus stood beside her, a pistol in his hand, his expensive suit incongruous against the decay surrounding them. Daniel, how touching that you brought your new girlfriend. Marcus's voice echoed in the empty space. I told you to come alone, and I told you that you'd regret threatening my daughter. Daniel stepped forward, positioning himself between the gun and Victoria. Let her go. This is between us. No, I think it's between all of us now. Marcus gestured with the weapon, his movements jerky with barely controlled rage. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? 15 years of work. 15 years of building my reputation, my network, my future. All destroyed because you couldn't accept that some people are simply better at taking credit than others. You mean some people are better at stealing? Stealing implies I took something that mattered. Your ideas were worthless until I gave them value, until I packaged them, marketed them, sold them to people who could never understand the technical details. Marcus's laugh held the edge of hysteria. You should have been grateful. Instead, you went crying to lawyers and boards and anyone who would listen. Victoria circled slowly toward Emma, using Daniel's confrontation as cover. The child's eyes tracked her movement with desperate hope. The police are surrounding this building. Victoria kept her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Thomas's security team is positioning as we speak. You have nowhere to go, Marcus. Then I have nothing to lose. Marcus swung the gun toward Victoria. Stop moving. She froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Here's what's going to happen. Marcus seemed calmer now, the resignation of the damned settling over his features. Daniel is going to sign a confession admitting to sabotaging Meridian systems. Victoria is going to issue a statement exonerating me and blaming the investigation on corporate rivals. Then maybe I'll let the little girl live. You know we can't do that. Can't or won't? Marcus pressed the gun barrel against Emma's head, and the child finally whimpered a small sound that tore through Daniel like a bullet. I wonder how your principles hold up against her brains on the floor. Daniel's voice emerged as something barely human. I'll sign whatever you want. Just don't hurt her. Daddy, no. Emma's words were quiet but clear. He's lying. He'll hurt us anyway. Smart girl. Marcus smiled without warmth. Smarter than her father, clearly. But ultimately, intelligence doesn't matter. Only power matters. And right now, I have all of it. Victoria calculated angles and distances, searching for any advantage. Thomas's team should have been in position by now. The police captain had promised response within minutes of her signal, but minutes could be eternities when a gun pressed against a child's skull. Marcus, she stepped forward despite the weapon trained on her. You want to be seen. You want to matter. That's what this has always been about, isn't it? Proving you're more than the family disappointment, more than the mediocre son who could never measure up. Don't psychoanalyze me. I'm not. I'm recognizing myself. Victoria continued her slow advance. I spent 20 years building walls because I was terrified of being weak. Terrified of ending up like my mother destroyed by trusting the wrong person. I turned myself into a machine because machines don't feel pain. Stop moving. But machines don't feel anything else either. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that the point of walls is to protect something worth protecting. Victoria gestured toward Daniel, toward Emma. These people showed me what I was missing. They showed me that strength isn't standing alone. It's standing with people who matter. This is pathetic. You think a speech is going to save them? No. Victoria shook her head slowly. I think you're going to save them. Because you're not actually a monster, Marcus. You're just a man who got lost trying to prove something to people who will never care. You don't know anything about me. I know you could have triggered that logic bomb and destroyed everything. You didn't. I know you could have hurt Emma before we arrived. You didn't. Victoria stood directly in front of him now, close enough to see the tremor in his gun hand. You've spent your entire life performing for an audience that doesn't exist. The board is gone. The investors are gone. The reputation you built is ash. There's no one left to impress. Marcus's face contorted with emotions he'd spent a lifetime suppressing. The gun wavered between Victoria and Emma, uncertain of its target. So would I just give up? Let them put me in a cage for the rest of my life? I don't know what happens next, but I know it doesn't have to end with a dead child and the certainty that you've become exactly what your father always said you were: nothing. Marcus flinched at the word, and Victoria saw something crack behind his eyes. For a moment, he looked like a lost boy, rather than a corporate predator, someone who had made terrible choices for reasons that had never made sense even to him. The warehouse fell silent, except for the distant sound of sirens approaching. Emma spoke then, her voice cutting through the tension with the clarity only children possess. You're sad. She was looking at Marcus with those impossibly perceptive eyes. You're really sad. That's why you hurt people. Marcus stared at the child, and something in his expression shifted. Victoria watched him really see Emma for the first time, not as leverage or a weapon, but as a small human being who had just offered him something no adult in his life ever had: understanding without excuse. Marcus's voice broke. He looked at the gun in his hand, as if seeing it for the first time, then at Emma's unafraid eyes, then at Daniel's desperate terror. The performance he'd maintained for 15 years finally collapsed, leaving only the exhausted man beneath. I'm tired. His voice emerged as barely a whisper. I'm so tired of all of it. The gun clattered to the concrete floor. Daniel moved instantly, sweeping Emma into his arms, carrying her away from Marcus with the desperate speed of a man recovering the most precious thing in his world. Victoria kicked the fallen weapon aside. Thomas's security team burst through the loading doors, followed by Chicago police with weapons drawn. Marcus didn't resist. He stood motionless while they cuffed him, his eyes fixed on some point beyond the warehouse walls, already serving a sentence that had begun long before any court could impose one. Victoria found herself beside Daniel and Emma, her arms joining theirs, in an embrace that transcended the boundaries she'd spent her life enforcing. The child clung to her father with fierce determination, while reaching out to include Victoria in the circle of safety. You came. Emma's voice trembled, but didn't break. You promised you would, and you came. Of course I came. Victoria stroked the girl's tangled hair. I always keep my promises now. Daniel's eyes met hers over Emma's head, and Victoria saw there something she'd never expected to find: gratitude transforming into something deeper, something that might have been the beginning of love. The aftermath unfolded over weeks that blurred together in a haze of legal proceedings and corporate restructuring. Marcus Webb pleaded guilty to charges including fraud, embezzlement, market manipulation, and kidnapping. His sentence, 20 years in federal prison, ensured he would never threaten anyone again. Diane Powell received 3 years probation and a permanent ban from the securities industry, her career destroyed by the association with a man she'd believed would elevate her. Victoria transformed Meridian Technologies with the same intensity she'd once applied to building walls around her heart. The transparent attribution system she implemented ensured that innovation would never again be stolen from its creators. Every patent, every improvement, every breakthrough would bear the name of its actual architect with compensation that reflected true value rather than political positioning. The Employee Support Fund she established provided resources for single parents, caregivers, and anyone whose personal responsibilities conflicted with traditional corporate expectations. Flexible scheduling became policy rather than privilege. Emergency child care and mental health resources joined the benefits package. The people who had kept Meridian running from the shadows finally had an infrastructure designed to support them. The open-door policy she instituted reserved 2 hours each week for any employee to meet directly with the CEO without appointment, without filtering through management layers that might suppress inconvenient truths. Victoria offered Daniel the position of vice president for technical innovation, a role that would recognize his contributions and restore the career Marcus had stolen. He declined as she'd expected he would. "I don't need titles or corner offices. I need time with Emma and work that matters." Daniel's explanation came during a conversation in his small apartment, the same space where they'd planned the takedown of a corporate empire. "Create something that lets me contribute without sacrificing what actually makes life worth living." Victoria designed a position that had never existed before, senior technical advisor, reporting directly to her with complete flexibility in schedule and location. Daniel would focus on the innovations he loved without the administrative burden that had never suited his temperament. He would be paid what he was worth, significantly more than he'd earned as a senior engineer, without the golden handcuffs that trapped so many talented people in roles they hated. The therapy Victoria began surprised everyone, including herself. She sat in a psychiatrist's office 3 times a week, excavating the buried trauma that had shaped her into someone incapable of connection. She talked about Eleanor, about the slow decay of watching her mother surrender to grief. She talked about the walls, the fortress she'd constructed brick by brick from childhood forward. She talked about Daniel and Emma, about the way they dismantled her defenses simply by treating her like a human being rather than a CEO. Vulnerability isn't weakness. Dr. Patterson's voice carried the patience of someone accustomed to guiding people through minefields. Vulnerability is the price of connection. You can have walls or you can have relationships, but you can't have both. Victoria was learning to choose relationships. The transition between allies and something more happened gradually, measured in small moments rather than dramatic declarations. 2 weeks after the warehouse, Victoria arrived at Daniel's apartment with takeout from his favorite Thai restaurant, claiming she wanted to discuss system upgrades. They ended up talking until midnight about everything except work, his years at MIT, her mother's garden in Cleveland, the books they'd read as children, the dreams they'd abandoned, and the ones they still held close. A month later, she attended Emma's school play without being invited. Daniel found her in the back row trying to be invisible and moved to sit beside her without a word. Their shoulders touched throughout the performance, and neither pulled away. 6 weeks after that, Victoria was at their apartment 3 evenings a week, helping Emma with homework. She didn't need help with learning to cook pasta that always came out slightly wrong, discovering that domestic chaos could feel like peace. "You're different here," Daniel observed one night, watching her struggle with a stubborn jar lid. "Softer, more present. I'm learning." Victoria finally conquered the lid with an undignified grunt. "Emma's a good teacher." "So are you." He took the jar from her hands, their fingers brushing. "She drew another picture of you yesterday. Want to see?" The portrait showed Victoria at their kitchen table, laughing at something off-frame. Her hair was loose, her posture relaxed, her expression open in ways that photographs never captured. "Is this how she sees me?" "It's how you are when you are not watching yourself." Daniel set the drawing aside. "I like that version of you. I'm starting to like her, too." They stood close in the small kitchen, the domesticity of the moment more intimate than any grand gesture could be. Victoria felt the familiar urge to retreat, to rebuild the walls that had kept her safe for so long. Instead, she stayed. "Daniel, I need to tell you something." Okay. I don't know how to do this. Relationships, family, any of it. She forced herself to hold his gaze. I've been alone so long that I don't remember how to be anything else. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to pull away when I shouldn't. I'm going to hurt you without meaning to. I know. And you're okay with that. I'm okay with trying. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. Victoria, I spent 3 years being invisible. I know what it's like to be afraid. I know what it's like to build walls because the alternative seems worse. His hand lingered against her cheek. But I also know that the best things in my life came from taking risks I wasn't ready for. Like Emma. Like Emma. Like this. He gestured at the space between them, the fragile thing they were building. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking you to keep showing up. I can do that. The first kiss happened then in the cramped kitchen of a Logan Square apartment surrounded by failed pasta and children's drawings and the accumulated evidence of lives being rebuilt. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was hesitant and imperfect and exactly right, two people who had forgotten how to trust remembering together. One evening, 3 months after the warehouse, Victoria sat at Daniel's kitchen table while Emma showed her a new series of portraits. The subjects were familiar: Daniel with various expressions, Rachel looking serious, Thomas with his worried eyes. Then Emma produced a drawing that stopped Victoria's breath. The portrait showed Victoria herself, but not the woman from those early sketches with empty eyes and frozen features. This Victoria smiled with genuine warmth. Her eyes held depths rather than barriers. Her posture suggested someone at ease in her own skin. This is you now. Emma's voice carried the certainty of an artist satisfied with her work. You look happy. Victoria studied the image, recognizing the truth in a child's perception. I am happy. The admission surprised her with its honesty. I didn't know I could be for a long time, but I'm learning. Emma nodded as if this confirmed something she'd already known. Then, with the directness only children possess, she asked the question Victoria had been avoiding. Are you going to marry Daddy? Daniel choked on his coffee across the table. Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, an unfamiliar sensation she identified after a moment as embarrassment. And that's not... Daniel's protest trailed off as he met Victoria's eyes. It's okay. Victoria turned to face Emma with the same seriousness she'd bring to any important negotiation. I don't know if your daddy and I will get married. We're still figuring out how we feel about each other. But I can tell you that I care about both of you very much, and I want to be part of your lives for as long as you'll have me. Emma considered this with her characteristic intensity. That's a good answer. Mommy always said the best answers are honest ones, even when they're not what people want to hear. Daniel reached across the table and took Victoria's hand, the gesture natural after months of gradual intimacy. Sarah would have liked you. His voice carried the particular tenderness of someone sharing something precious. She believed in second chances. She thought people could always change if they wanted it badly enough. I wish I could have known her. You know her through Emma. Every time my daughter surprises me with how much she sees and understands, I see Sarah looking back at me. Daniel squeezed Victoria's hand. And now I see you looking at Emma the same way. Like she's someone worth learning from, rather than just a child to be managed. Emma had returned to her drawing, apparently satisfied that the adults had reached an acceptable understanding. Her crayon moved across paper with focused purpose, already beginning a new portrait whose subject remained hidden from view. Victoria watched father and daughter existing in their comfortable rhythm and felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain, she realized, but expansion. The walls she'd spent a lifetime building were finally coming down, and what remained underneath was larger than she'd ever imagined. Victoria learned to show up for the small moments: Emma's school play, Daniel's frustration with a stubborn engineering problem, the anniversary of Sarah's death, when father and daughter needed someone to sit with them in their grief without trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Daniel learned to accept that Victoria's transformation was genuine, that the walls she'd dismantled wouldn't reassemble at the first sign of difficulty. He stopped waiting for her to revert to the cold CEO who'd once tried to destroy him. He started believing in the woman she was becoming. The real test came 4 months after the warehouse on a Sunday afternoon that started ordinarily and ended with revelation. Victoria had taken Emma to the Art Institute while Daniel caught up on a project deadline. They wandered through galleries, Emma providing commentary that ranged from the insightful to the absurd Victoria Vara, discovering that she could enjoy art without analyzing its investment potential. Vic, Emma tugged her hand in front of a Monet. Can I ask you something always? Do you love Daddy? Victoria had faced hostile boards, threatening competitors, and her own mother's slow death. None of it had prepared her for the directness of a 7-year-old's question. Yes, the word came out before her defenses could engage. I do. Have you told him? Not in those words. Emma considered this with the gravity of a philosopher examining a complex argument. Why not? Victoria knelt to Emma's level, meeting those two perceptive green eyes. Because I'm scared. Saying it out loud makes it real, and real things can hurt. But real things can also be wonderful. Emma reached out and touched Victoria's face with her small hand. Daddy's scared too. He lost Mommy. He doesn't want to lose anyone else he loves. I know. But he loves you anyway, even though he's scared. Emma's smile held wisdom no child should possess. That's what brave is, right? Doing the scary thing because it matters. Victoria felt tears she hadn't permitted in decades pressing against her eyes. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. Adults just don't listen. They finished their museum visit and returned to the apartment where Daniel was wrestling with code that refused to cooperate. Victoria sent Emma to her room with the excuse of homework, then stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the man who had somehow dismantled every wall she'd ever built. Daniel. He looked up, saw something in her expression that made him set aside his laptop immediately. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Victoria crossed to where he sat, knelt in front of him, took his hands in hers. I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Okay. His voice was cautious, braced for impact. I love you. The words came out steadier than she expected. I love how patient you are with Emma. I love how you remember how I take my coffee. I love that you see through my masks and like, what's underneath anyway? I love that you chose your daughter over your career without a moment's hesitation. I love that you gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. Daniel was very still, his hands warm in hers. I'm terrified, Victoria continued. I don't know how to be a partner or a parent figure or any of the things this relationship might require. I'm going to make mistakes, probably a lot of them. But I want to try. I want to keep showing up like you asked. I want to be part of whatever family you and Emma are willing to share with me. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Daniel leaned forward and kissed her. Not the tentative kisses they'd shared before, but something fiercer, more certain. I love you too, he said against her lips. I've loved you since you knelt down to talk to Emma like she mattered. I just didn't know how to say it. We're a pair of cowards. Former cowards. His smile was brighter than she'd ever seen it. We're getting braver. The ending, when it arrived, looked nothing like Victoria had imagined endings could look. 1 year after the warehouse confrontation, they sat together in a neighborhood restaurant that served excellent pizza and tolerated the crayon drawings Emma left behind on paper placemats. The setting was ordinary, unremarkable, exactly the kind of place Victoria would never have noticed in her previous life. Emma chattered about her science fair project, an elaborate demonstration of electrical circuits that incorporated color-changing LEDs and bore unmistakable traces of her father's engineering brilliance. She had won first place in her age category, and her pride shone from every word. Daniel listened with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered, asking questions that let his daughter feel heard rather than merely tolerated. His hand rested on Victoria's under the table, casual intimacy that had become as natural as breathing. Victoria watched them both, cataloging the details she would have dismissed as irrelevant a year ago. The way the restaurant's warm lighting softened the lines of fatigue on Daniel's face, the sauce stain on Emma's collar from enthusiasm overcoming table manners, the normalcy of an evening spent in each other's company without agendas or outcomes. Vic, Emma's voice interrupted her reverie. Are you listening? Victoria smiled at the nickname only Emma was permitted to use. Always, tell me more about the LED pattern controller. As Emma launched into technical explanations that demonstrated her father's influence, Victoria found herself thinking about the woman she'd been when this story began. The CEO who saw employees as assets or obstacles. The daughter who had built her entire identity on never becoming her mother. The human being who had forgotten how to feel. That woman would have found this evening intolerable. The noise, the mess, the inefficiency of spending hours in a cheap restaurant when work emails accumulated unanswered. This woman found it perfect. What are you thinking about? Daniel's question came softly, meant only for her. How much I've changed. How much I still have to change. Victoria turned to face him fully. How grateful I am that you gave me a second chance to get things right. You gave yourself the second chance. I just showed up when you needed someone. That's love, isn't it? Showing up when someone needs you, even when they don't deserve it. Daniel's smile carried the weight of everything they'd survived together, especially when they don't think they deserve it. Emma looked up from her pizza with the particular expression that preceded important announcements. I finished my new picture. She pulled a folded paper from her backpack with ceremonial gravity. It's my family portrait for the class art show. She unfolded the drawing and placed it on the table between them. Three figures stood together against a background of bright colors, their hands linked, their faces rendered with careful attention to expression. Daniel on one side, Victoria on the other, Emma in the middle. Above them in a child's careful lettering were two words, my family. Victoria stared at the image, the simple declaration of belonging that she had never expected to receive. Emma, her voice emerged rough with emotion. This is beautiful. I know. Emma's matter-of-fact confidence contained no arrogance, only the certainty of someone stating obvious truth. I draw what I see, and I see a family. Daniel's arms slid around Victoria's shoulders, drawing her close. On the other side of the table, Emma returned to her pizza with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully communicated something important. They sat together as the restaurant filled with other families, other stories, other ordinary evenings that constituted the actual substance of human life. Victoria had spent decades chasing achievements that looked impressive from the outside while remaining empty within. She had confused success with significance, power with purpose, control with connection. Here in a pizza restaurant with sauce-stained tablecloths and crayon drawings and two people who had somehow taught her to feel again, she finally understood what mattered. Not the quarterly reports, or the stock prices, or the strategic acquisitions, not the corner office, or the designer suits, or the fear-based respect of subordinates. What mattered was this, a 7-year-old girl who saw through walls that had fooled everyone else, a man who had chosen love over ambition and never regretted the choice, a family built not from blood, but from the decision to show up again and again even when it was terrifying. Victoria had spent her entire life believing that vulnerability meant weakness, that letting people in meant giving them weapons to destroy you. Daniel and Emma had shown her a different truth, that walls might protect you from pain, but they also protected you from everything that made pain worth risking. That the alternative to being hurt wasn't safety, it was emptiness. That the only real security came not from isolation, but from connection with people who would stand beside you when everything fell apart. She reached across the table and took Emma's hand, completing the circle that had begun forming. The night a 7-year-old girl looked at a cold CEO and saw someone worth saving. Thank you, Victoria's voice carried everything she couldn't fully articulate. Both of you, for seeing me, for waiting while I learned to see myself. Emma squeezed her hand with the fierce grip of a child who had known too much loss too young. Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders. Outside the restaurant windows, Chicago continued its eternal motion, people rushing toward destinations that seemed urgent, lights flickering in towers full of workers who were sacrificing their lives for companies that would forget them by the next quarterly report. Victoria no longer envied them their momentum. She had found something better than momentum. She had found stillness. The quiet contentment of sitting with people who loved her, not for what she could do, but for who she was learning to become. The family portrait rested between them on the sauce-stained table, a child's crayon rendering of something that hadn't existed a year ago and now felt eternal. Three figures holding hands, two words above their heads. My family. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.